Okay, so we're back here with Tye-Dyed Iguana. I'm Grace. So today we're going to set up another bioactive enclosure. You might have seen our last one. This time it's going to be for a little bit of a different type of lizard. It's going to be a terrestrial lizard, and on top of that, it's not as much of a tropical setup in comparison with the gargoyle setup that we did. So we're starting out on the bottom. We have our hydroton. I went ahead and already added it to the tank, but I soaked it in water just to get the dust and the dirt off of it as much as possible. And then you're going to layer that in the bottom. And then you're going to go ahead and grab a screen and you're going to put it on top. So it's okay for this to kick up at the sides here because you don't want the dirt and substrate to get down into that hydroton on the bottom. Reason being, if the dirt gets down there, it'll get nasty and gross and you don't want that. So our next layer to this is going to be our charcoal. So in here I have our activated charcoal. I also wetted it down already. But with this, what this does is it filters out any excess moisture and water that goes through it, gets filtered and cleaned and keeps it from getting stagnant on you while you have your enclosure set up. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put a layer of this down. So with this, I usually start about the edges so that I can weigh those edges down so dirt doesn't get through. If a little bit of charcoal goes past the screen, that's fine because the charcoal stays purified essentially. I don't know if that's like the right word for it, but it's not going to go stagnant and gross like soil would. So I got that layer of charcoal spread out. With this though, I didn't go as thick with the charcoal as I did with that tropical setup, and just because this setup's not going to have nearly the same moisture going through it that the other one did. However, you could choose to do it just as thick if you wanted. I'm going to keep it a little thinner because this also isn't as tall of a tank, so I don't want to take up as much space of the tank by doing it super thick. So the next layer is going to be our bedding. So for my African fattails, I like to use these two types of bedding right here. I like to use the Repti soil, and I like to mix it with Repti bark. So I'm going to put down a base layer with some Repti soil, and then I'll end up putting a little bit of Repti bark on top and kind of mix it in just a little bit to that top layer there. Now I'm going to go ahead and just spread this out. I'm just going to set very thinly over here. Reason being, I have these rocks down here and I want to build them up here, but I don't want to put a bunch of soil here and then my gecko be able to dig up under all that soil. They're less likely to dig the charcoal than they are the soil. So I'm going to go ahead and stack up these rocks in this corner. That way my gecko doesn't tunnel under them and then make it come crashing down on them. So the most important thing when doing this is you want it to be stable. If it's not stable and your gecko goes to climb on it, it could fall and you don't want that. So just take your time with it. If it doesn't seem like it's working quite the way it should at first, take time, rebuild it. It might take a few tries, but it's definitely worth it once you get it down because you want it to be a safe place for your gecko. I'm just testing this with my hand to see the stability of it. And I don't like how this is, so I'm going to change that up some. Okay, so I went ahead, took that apart, and restacked those last top pieces. And I'm just pushing. This force that I'm pushing is not something my gecko would be strong enough to do. So I'm happy with that and how safe that is. Also with this setup, as opposed to the setup we did last time, I'm actually going to need a water bowl. So that's something I need to keep in mind while I'm making this setup. So, well, while the rocks are all set up, I'm going to go back and we're going to go ahead and get back to adding more of the substrate. Okay, so I took some Repti soil and I put it in this bin. And now I'm going to take some Repti bark and just pop it in there too. Just mix it around some. I like doing that because it gives it a little bit more texture to it, which I like. But also it just helps keep things a little more aerated. The bigger chunks are going to allow it to dry a little bit more. And while this is more of a semi-tropical in comparison. So we don't want that soil to stay super moist all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and try to put in some of our key pieces here, and then we'll work in the substrate around that. Okay, so I have some different pieces of cork bark here, and I just kind of want to play around. I know that I want this to lead up to this perch because this is going to be the hot end of my enclosure. And while my gecko might not always want to hang out up here, I want them to have that option for an easy climb up if they did. And a lot of times if you give them the space to do something, they'll usually do it. Whether you're around to see it or not is a different story. So I'm just kind of feeling out. I like the way that is. I want to make sure my gecko has multiple hides in this enclosure. One on the cool end, of course. And there's such a big gap under here that I know my gecko won't feel very secure as this as a hiding spot. And the reason this cork is here is to act more as a climbing bridge up to that basking spot here. So I have this piece that's a little bit more shallow that we're going to stick under here. So what I've done here is I have this piece here, and this piece actually is upraised enough that it can crawl under here and hide if it wants. It can also sit on top of this piece while being under this piece. And then I also have a hide that's placed over here. So I do have this water bowl. And for the water bowl, I do want to keep it on the cool side. So I'm going to place it there as just a reminder of where it's going to go, so I don't run out of space for it, because that's very important. So next I need to kind of figure out where I want the plants. Where you want the plants kind of can vary. And everyone does their own things. So I have these false Aurelias here, and then this one's a coffee plant, and I can't remember what those guys are named, but I got them all here at the shop. So I'm kind of just playing around with the plants right now, just kind of figuring out what I like. And you got to have some imagination to it too, because they are higher up than what they will be once I take them out of their pots and plant them in the ground. So I am going to take a chance, and over in this corner I do want to put a plant, but since it'll be under the heat light, it might not do the best. But I want to chance it and find out. So that would be a good spot for there. And then I do have this den. It's a little higher up than the other one. So I do want to plant a plant right here just to kind of make it feel a little more secure. Well, I like the way it looks, and so now the next step for me is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and pull these plants out of their pots, get some of that dirt away from the roots, and then I'm going to go ahead and work on planting them. I just tap away the stuff off the roots, as we don't need that soil on them. I'm going to go ahead and dig a little hole, and we're going to plant this. I like the way that looks, and so we're going to go ahead and move on to the next plant. So this is our last plant to go in, and this dude's gonna go right here in front of this cave so that while in there it feels a little more secure. So while I want this cage to look nice, it's also important to remember making sure your reptile feels comfortable and safe and not super exposed. So that's always something I take into account when I'm making these enclosures. So now I'm just going to throw some of this on top of that substrate here. Gives it a little bit more texture. Makes it look a little more natural in my opinion too. Let me move this out the way. Put it around the edge of these plants here. But I want to make sure I kick it off the leaves too, because you don't want a bunch of soil sitting on top of your leaves. Okay, so this is what our tank looks like. And the next and last step to this is two things actually. The next thing we're gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and add our isopods here. So these are our orange isopods, and you can see them running around. These guys are very fast little dudes compared to the other isopods. And I'm just going to sprinkle them in here. Okay, so I got the isopods added in, and so I'm going to go ahead and spray it in this tank really well. So I'll be right back with that. Okay, I'm back. So the last step I'm gonna do, and I kind of did it in reverse on the last video. I sprayed before I put the isopods in. Doesn't really matter, but I'm gonna go ahead and spray this tank down. One of the most important things after planting all these live plants is gonna be spraying them in. So make sure you directly spray the base of these plants, so that way the soil there is just extra moist. It helps them jump start and helps prevent shock from transplanting them. So, and while you will need your heat lamp on this, you'll still also, of course, need a light fixture for your live plants, because they do need their own light, and it is different from what you would get out of a heat bulb. Oh, and these little isopods will end up taking over the tank and eating up all the poo-poo. So makes it for less maintenance in the long run. Alright, so I didn't add any leaves to this enclosure. One, I ran out, but also two, on something like this, because it is a 10-gallon, I'd prefer to use smaller leaves than the magnolia leaves that I had on our last video. So this will end up getting some leaf litter later on, and that's just food for the isopods, but it will also be places for them to hide as well. So well, that's why if you watched our last video and you're watching this one, why you might not have seen it. That's why. Now after spraying it down, it's all ready for you to add your new scaly friend.